Hello everyone, in this recording we're going to be talking about contextualising transnational education. And I'm sorry if it's going to be sounding a bit dry, but you know the importance of embedding everything in foundation knowledge. So we're going to quickly look at defining TNE, what is it, and then looking at how TNE is positioned at RMIT University, some of the history and policies, and then the scope and volume. Through this recording, we're going to stop at some intervals, and Ian's going to be talking with you about some action items that we'd like you to do and bring those insights into the next face-to-face workshop. So if we look at defining TNE, it's actually, like all definitions, more than one perspective, and there's multiple definitions and there's no one right answer. And I draw you to, in your reference list, the work by Herman, who talks about this quite nicely. And with TNE, we can't think about it as a positive or a negative force in higher education. It's now a fact of life. RMIT is one of the biggest deliverers of TNE among Australian universities, and we've particularly got quite a presence in Southeast Asia. So let's look at what are some of the differences in terms. If we think about globalization, internationalization and transnational education, or TNE, we find there are subtle differences. So globalization is talking about an organisation that's becoming more global. So it's systems and relationships which are practiced beyond local and national dimensions. That can be from basic environmental perspectives such as technological, cultural, political, economic, and in our case, educational. So how does globalisation differ from internationalisation? Well, internationalisation is about having power and domination in an international arena. So it's the role of the nation state, in this case Australia. And how does it integrate its international and intercultural dimensions into its teaching and research and service functions into higher education? So you think about globalisation, which is more systems and relationships becoming more global, or now internationalisation is integrating that. And then higher education over time, and we're going to look at RMIT's history shortly, has been developed in an international direction. Now, transnational education is an integral part of internationalisation, and it's the movement of educational programs and institutions in one country or region, either physically or virtually. And Australia, and particularly RMIT, exerts substantial influence of TNE in Asia. But I'd encourage you to look at the reference list, and in particular Harman, Huang, Dos Santos, Gribble and Zaguros, Mock and Feast and Breitag to explore these definitions in more detail. So I'd like you to look at the slide on TNE definitions, and you can see there's some examples of branch campuses, articulation of programs, corporate programs, learning, distance education, franchises, twinning online. These are all features of transnational education, and it's in which the learners are located in a country different from that where the awarding institution is based. So, for example, as we'll see shortly, RMIT has got a presence in Southeast Asia, Asia and Europe, and then also twinning and partnering institutions. There's also, we often use the term offshore, and I really want you to think about that. For Singapore students, do they consider themselves offshore? They would consider Melbourne offshore, and their onshore is Singapore. But because the awarding institution is located in Australia, the term offshore is often used to talk about its other offerings located elsewhere. So with that, you can see that Sugimoto in Huang reference refers to it as any educational training at higher education level which is provided beyond the national or regional border through the mobility of people, program or institution. Now look, if we look at RMIT's history and its contribution to TNE, you can see since 1980, so it's some decades ago, that it shifted from a two-tiered tertiary system to the singular unified national system it now is. It's had massive impact. It's got the second highest number of offshore studying international students of any university, Australia's 38 universities, and particularly in 2003, which is now over a decade ago, it was recognised as having important synergies for attracting overseas students to onshore programs. So there's more than one type of TNE, and if we look at Asia, for example, we've got two examples there. Incorporated or domestic orientated arrangements, which is regulated by the national legislation in the host countries such as China or Vietnam in our examples, or extracurricular and overseas led, which is independent of the host country and operates through market mechanisms, and RMIT is very specifically incorporated and domestic oriented. Now, if we look at RMIT's management of TNE, and shortly after this segment, Ian's going to give you an action item, and we've also on this slide given you the website we'd like you to go to, you can actually see that it's a very complex management. Hence, when you're dealing with your offshore deliveries in particular, you're going to have a lot of professional services that you'll be accountable to and will also be directing and guiding you. And that's because the university, has identified our offshore partners, they've then got to coordinate the interactions, and also we've got to make sure that we comply with the decisions of the contract issues, and particularly the monitoring and reporting to international and development. So as educators, we actually have a lot of responsibility and accountability around that.
Thank you, Marg, for that presentation. Because this is meant to be quite interactive, what we're going to do periodically is pause the presentations and ask you to reflect on something. This is the first of those reflections. In this reflection, we want you to think about RMIT's management of transnational education and how that management or those policies and procedures impact on the way that you conduct your course delivery in whatever location you've chosen.
So we've talked about the different types of TNE in Asia. So if we look at RMIT's scope, and we've given you two links there to Singapore Institute of Management and RMIT Vietnam, that we have very strong presence in, but we're also delivering Hong Kong, Malaysia, Shanghai, Sri Lanka, and also now in Barcelona. If we look at the TNE delivery models, I'd really like you to go to the Dunham, Wallace and Leask references and read about this, because it really does impact on our teaching practice. So we have three different delivery models: full, intensive and local delivery. And as you will read, full delivery is by Australian academics at an offshore campus. We also have block teaching by the Australian academic with ongoing classes by the local lecturer, and that's the intensive delivery model, and that's very typical of our Singapore offering. And then with local delivery, that's wholly delivered by local lecturers with moderation visits using the parent university curriculum, and that's very typical of our Vietnam delivery model. There's now a new paradigm of students that come to their university with differing expectations to what we might have had when we were going through university. Let's start looking at some of the differences in expectations which underpins transnational education. Our students have a paradigm of themselves as a consumer with very specific expectations of what the client can deliver on, and some of those differences are physical space, social milieu, cultural and linguistic factors, teaching staff and access to materials. And we've given you three references: Coleman, Mock and Feast and Breitag, that are in the reference list that we'd like you to look at before the next workshop. The university is committed to developing resources to enhance our transnational teaching experiences, and we direct you to 22 quick guides that are specifically targeted to transnational teaching. They were developed by the College of Business, and they give us introductory level information across the themes of institutional context, teaching practice, assessment and feedback, and teaching scholarship. And Ian's now going to give you an action item that he'd like you to do before the next workshop, and we've given you the link there to these quick guides.
A second pause. We'd like you to go away and read the Transnational Education quick guides that are posted for you. They're in RMIT on the website, but they're also conveniently on our Blackboard. Have a look at the quick guides and consider ways that you can apply the information to enhance your teaching practice, again in the location that you've chosen for your research. You've heard Marg talk about various aspects of theory, and the action point here is to go to the reference list, which is on the Blackboard site for our course, which will take you to the references in the RMIT library. Choose a reference from Session 1 reference list, reflect on the key issues that are raised in that article, and bring your ideas back to the first face-to-face workshop.